And away we go.
Hi. As you've guessed it by now, I am the Bradley Hall. I wanted you to know that I am a certified trauma recovery coach and a certified mindfulness instructor and a certified holistic life coach. Now, what this means is that I am a trauma-informed holistic life coach with a focus on awareness, which is the first step to any type of personal growth. Let my 30 years of coaching and my experience overcoming trauma work for you. To work with me, go to my website, thebradleyhall.com. Look for the coaching tab in the upper right-hand corner. You can choose holistic life coaching or trauma recovery coaching. Anyone who ever accomplished anything had a great coach or a great mentor. You should too. You're worth it. Contact me now. I am proud to announce that today's episode, as well as every episode this month during NPE Awareness Month, is brought to you in partnership between The Bradley Hall Show and the NPE Friends Fellowship. You can find out more information at npefellowship.org. It's good to see you, Owen. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to have you. So to let people know, I've read your bio. But let's start here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, how do I start that? I'm from Texas. I grew up in Houston. I developed an interest in filmmaking while in high school and decided to pursue it in college. And I went to Southern California to study film at Chapman University, which is just outside of Los Angeles. And then after graduating and spending some years working out there in the industry, I decided to move back to Texas and settled in Austin, which is a big hub for not just filmmaking, but a lot of creative fields, which is why I chose to be here. And since then, I've been getting more and more into directing documentary work, doing a lot of short form work for different advertising brands, and some just normal documentary work for particularly the Texas State History Museum. And this has all been through a company that I work at here called Edwards Media. And sometime in the last year or so, we started to think, well, why don't we try to do some longer form documentary work, subjects we're really interested in, like feature film documentaries that you might see like on Netflix or, that kind of platform. And so that's sort of how I ended up working on this documentary on the effects of DNA testing on families.
Okay, great. So to back up a little bit, that's how you and I know each other.
Yep.
We met each other last year on the NPE cruise as you were there filming for your documentary, which is on the NPE experience. And so here we are. So I'm grateful to have you. We're going to talk a little bit about your documentary today and your experiences as really, and I don't mean this in a derogatory fashion, but as an outsider, right? Because you're not the NPE.
Right. That's true. And I should probably preface this whole conversation in saying that, regardless of how many interviews I've conducted or lectures I've sat in, I'll never really have the same understanding of the NP experience that someone who's made that discovery has. And so everything I'm speaking about is sort of through the context of other people's experiences that I've listened to.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important. And one of the big things that I've learned about all this is that it's basically not possible to relate and totally understand that experience unless you've been in it yourself.
So there's 2 points I want to pull out of that. First is you're right? So it is impossible to understand what an NPE is going through unless you're the NPE. and I've talked about that on a lot of my previous episodes. A lot of people are just like, your dad's your dad. I don't understand why you feel this way. It's not that big a deal, and you can't understand. But I love the fact that we're going to talk about from your vantage point, because your vantage point is very valuable from many different aspects. Because first of all, it's your aunt, correct?
That's
That
was
was
the
the
family
original
member.
NPE. That's how you okay. So I've also talked a lot about in previous episodes about how this has a ripple effect and affects everyone around them. And so you have that vantage point because your aunt and your father are siblings. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So you have that vantage point that it did affect you. It does affect the entire family.
Right.
But also, I love your perspective from being a videographer and the documentary and all the different people that you've gotten to speak to and hear their stories and the different vantage points, which we're going to talk about. So I don't want to minimize your perspective. I think your perspective is very, very powerful. And that's why I've invited you here today. And I think you have a lot to offer our
Thanks.
listeners. Yeah, you're
Thanks.
welcome. So, all right. So you just want to start from the beginning? You just want to tell the story as you got involved and go from there?
Yeah. As I mentioned, there was conversation at the company I'm working at about doing some longer form documentaries. I was given the opportunity to sort of find a topic that I was interested in exploring. And at about the same time, this was, I think, January of last year, 2019, I found out that my aunt had discovered through a DNA test that the father she thought was her biological father was in fact not genetically related to her, and that the entire side of her family, her paternal side, was not genetically related. And she was my dad's half sister rather than full sibling. So it's sort of hard to remember all of the things that happened, but I definitely saw sort of an interesting process of how my aunt was taking that news, how my dad was taking that news, and then starting to hear just sort of how the family was interpreting all of that and trying to make sense of it.
Can you share a little bit about that? Or
yeah, well, I guess pivoting to the documentary, as I talked to my aunt a bit more about what was going on, I started to do some research, and I was learning that this is not just something my aunt is going through. It's something that a lot of people are discovering through Ancestry, 23andMe type at-home DNA tests. And that sort of was the catalyst to think maybe there's a documentary here, there's something to explore, that DNA tests are more than just finding your heritage, that they actually have a lot of other possible outcomes that are not as friendly as maybe the advertisements say they are. So yeah, my family, I think it was definitely, there was a long period of just sort of, what does this mean? And maybe a bit of denying that it meant anything. And when I started doing the documentary, I made a decision to visit my aunt and talk to her through doing an interview, which is when I really learned a lot about just everything. Sort of being the younger person in a family, I think sometimes you're not always given all the information. It's sort of filtered down to you. And it was just from an outsider perspective, as someone who was trying to figure out how to talk to my dad about this, it was important to hear my aunt's perspective and sort of get the full picture of sort of her discovery and what that really meant in terms of her relationship with my grandfather, her relationship with my dad.
Which changed because they went from being
Yeah.
full siblings to half siblings.
Yeah. And what you had said earlier about, some people have a perspective, well, we had the same father, your dad's your dad. Um, I could really see that contrast between my aunt and my dad. My aunt was very interested in learning as much as she could about her truth, about who her biological father was, or when half siblings started popping up, who they were. And I think for a while, my dad, it was, I think understandably difficult for him to relate to that. And I think that there was a long period of trying to figure out how it's changing the relationship between them. And the feeling that it's distancing them without even that word coming up. Just, I think the idea of the person that isn't making the NPE discovery, seeing their sibling suddenly have other family, can be hurtful in a way. And it can make someone feel maybe a little insecure about their relationship. And so I think there's a lot of, and you said ripple effects. I think that's exactly what it is. And that was just the first ripple. So every NPE discovery is a huge discovery and has such big implications for multiple families when you think about it. And I think that's why this documentary really means a lot to me, partly because through experiencing my family going through this, I've just seen the importance for communication and just a broader awareness of what these DNA tests can lead to, and sort of how to process all of that in all the complicated ways it affects a family.
Yeah. Very well said. It's very intricate. Very intricate.
It is. Yeah.
And with the popularity of the at-home DNA testing and the number of cases of NPE situations that are arising, I find it hard to believe that in the very near future that I don't know that there won't be anyone who isn't affected somehow with an NPE discovery, just by sheer numbers. We're so interconnected. We always find that whole, what is it, 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you ever heard that statement. I mean, life is very interconnected. It's a very small world. And this isn't going away. I mean, we talked about on the show the numbers. I've heard estimates between 2% to 20%. I know that the general consensus is right around 10%. Is that something you've heard as well?
Yeah.
And I've had people on the show who have refuted that. So I want to be clear that the data is still out. We still don't know, because there's a lot of people who haven't reported. There's so many different variables. But the fact of the matter is whether it's 2% or 10%, that's a lot of people, and just about everyone's going to be affected in some way or another in the future. Yeah.
And as I've, been making this documentary, it's been astounding to me how many people I've encountered in my personal life, just in the process of making this documentary. I mean, it'll be like a waiter at a restaurant that my aunt and I are eating at, and the conversation turns to DNA testing somehow, and they overhear it. It is amazing how many people have either made an NPE discovery or know someone that has. As you said, it's very widespread.
So, when we were on the cruise, there were 2 or 3 people who were on the cruise separately that weren't part of the group, who ended up gravitating towards the group for the same reason. They were NPEs and they overheard what we were doing.
That's right.
And also, when we went ashore in the Bahamas, I went to meet a friend that I had met in Costa Rica, and he lives in the Bahamas. And I hadn't seen him in a few years, so we stopped in to say hi to him. And as I began to explain to him what was going on, he informed me he also was an NPE. And so we're on this cruise. We're on the cruise, what, 5 days?
Mm-hmm.
5 days. and there's 3 to 5 people just came out of nowhere on the ship that heard. And how many people were there that didn't know what we were doing, never heard what we were doing, that are experienced? So it certainly is. It certainly is a phenomenon, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I guess as someone who is in their 20s, who's getting older, I'm in a period of my life where I'm starting to look at family differently, starting to maybe value it more than I had before. And so I think that's, that sort of adds a little fuel to my interest in this subject. And I think it also makes it really important to talk about.
Yeah. I think you're very lucky because of your age and what you do and what's happened. And you've gained a lot of wisdom in a very short period of time looking through this lens. And, which is, I'm grateful. I would only assume that's going to come out in the documentary, that looking at it through your eyes is going to come through. So you're going to have both. You're going to have youth. You're going to have an open mind, and you've got some wisdom that a lot of people your age don't have. So I think that's an exciting combination. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So, all right, let's talk about the documentary real quick.
Sure.
I mean, we can shift gears. We can shift gears all over the place. We can go wherever we want. But
yeah, I'm thinking of all the other stuff we should talk about with the documentary.
Yeah. So it's yet to be named, right?
That's right. We're still filming. There's still a bit of filming to do. So we haven't quite settled on a name yet, but I am very open to ideas. So maybe by the end of this podcast, we'll have some comments. But I should say that this
maybe
documentary,
we'll have a contest.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That.
I could use some ideas for the title. So I should say that this documentary is not just about my aunt. That was the catalyst for the documentary, but the film explores not just her story, but a few others as well. I guess what I wanted to do was to make sure that I included a wide variety of people's experiences, from just different demographics, essentially, different age groups, different locations in the United States. So it also follows 2 other people that I've come to know in the last year. And each has sort of a different story. My aunt, I think, has more of the story that I've heard a lot through the cruise, which we talked about, of sort of first understanding that their biological father, mother, parents were not who they thought they were through a DNA test. But I've also been following some people who had known because it was shared with them, the secret sort of came out earlier on in their life, sometimes when they were kids. And when DNA tests sort of became more widely available, they sometimes thinking about it and sometimes unconsciously went for it. And through that process have been on the road to discovering their biological family. Yeah. So there are a lot of different variations we should point out to this story. And my aunt's is just one of many different kinds.
Yeah. I fit into that latter category.
Mm-hmm.
Where I had some hints, I had some conversations, but I wasn't really thinking about it when I got the test, and suddenly all those worlds came crashing together. How many different people do you interview for your documentary? So
it's shared between 3 different main stories. My aunt is one of those. And then I also have, as you know, connected with NPE Friends Fellowship, and I'm super grateful to have met Catherine St. Clair and Rebecca Drumsta, and sort of been welcomed into visiting some of the conferences. The cruise is one, and interviewing some of the members of that group and some of the professionals and experts who have spoken at the conferences. And Catherine herself is someone I interview. So those were other people that are included in the documentary to sort of as a illustration of how wide of a scope this is, and to also get some sort of expert backbone to all of the testimonials throughout the documentary.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's quite a bit. It encompasses a lot. And one silver lining of having been home for the last few months working is I've finally been able to comb through all this footage and piece it together and see what I got. So that's been really helpful. Yeah.
And so you're looking at your release, you said sometime late in 2020, maybe early 2021?
Yeah, I think that's more of a completion goal.
Okay.
I think release is sort of, I'm not really sure right now. I think the goal is once we finish filming and finish editing, to look into different avenues for distributing and getting it out there so people can see it.
Yeah. Okay.
And as of now, we haven't really secured that, so we're still looking.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's been the biggest challenge for you in all this?
I think it's sort of something you touched on earlier, which is that I'm an outsider, and I'm telling other people's stories essentially, and it's always just about balancing that, an element of respect for their stories with telling it as honestly and unbiased as possible, and navigating a lot of sensitive topics. It's not an easy thing to talk about, and I'm really grateful that a lot of people have opened up to me, for the sake of sharing their stories. And then, from a personal standpoint, filming your own family is always a little complicated. And,
Sure.
I've interviewed my aunt, and I've also interviewed my dad, and just sort of navigating alternate sides of, different perspectives, while staying sort of an observer has been really important for the documentary, I think, because it is really important to see both sides, to see the side of the person making the discovery and the way that people outside that discovery are interpreting it. And, one of the biggest takeaways I've had from the documentary is, in a lot of aspects of life, but especially here, it's not so black and white. And, someone may say something that's hurtful, and it's coming from a place that if you look into it, there's a lot of, important emotion behind it that's valid. It's not necessarily coming from, a bad or negative place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it completely makes sense. So it sounds like that your experience in hearing different sides has given you the ability to see beyond initial judgment, initial pain, and to really, really understand human behavior, why people do the things they do, and to realize that life is extremely complicated. Extremely complicated.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and every experience is different, but for the at least my aunt's story, it's been really great to watch her go through that process of learning that a secret was kept from her, and then now a year later, having found who her biological father was and having had connected to her half siblings, coming to a point where she's forgiving of her mom, of her social father, throughout the process, and maybe even sort of understanding them better than she had before.
Yeah,
which I think is something that a lot of people that have made NPE discoveries go through.
of course, absolutely. And I'm glad that your aunt it sounds like she's finding finding peace. And that is my hope for, in particular, all NPEs. I mean, everyone involved, but, obviously I'm an NPE. So the NPEs are my primary focus in this discussion, because it does feel like betrayal. And we take, anytime anything is done to us, we take it personally. That's just the nature. It's the nature of our mind. That's the way our brains are created. We automatically take it personally. But, and this is what you were talking about. There were reasons that things happen. We don't know all the circumstances. We don't know how it happened. And it could be very as simple as someone just made a mistake. And we all make mistakes. And, you're probably at that age, Owen, where I talk about this on my podcast every once in a while, that we get to an age in life where suddenly we begin to realize that our parents aren't the superheroes we thought they were. And it changes our perspective of life. And I think even at a certain age around in that era, when we realize that, there might be a little sense of anger because the world has changed and we don't see it the way we did because it was all rainbows and butterflies. And then we realize that our parents aren't superheroes, that they are normal human beings like everyone else. And I think it begins to throw a little more light on their mistakes because it's right in front of us. Now we're like, oh, well, I didn't realize this, and this. And so our focal point changes to those things. But I think the next evolution in that is that we then start to make our own mistakes as an adult. And then we were like, oh, well, I probably shouldn't have been so judgmental about my parents because it's a lot harder to get through life without mistakes anyway. And I think that's part of wisdom. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that I think you have an accelerated rate of that simply, with the work you're doing, that in all these situations, people made choices, and some of them, it was because they had to, some of them it was because they felt like they had to, for whatever the case may be. Not all of them good, some of them mistakes. But in the end, it's what humans do. It's what's been going on. We just found we finally have the technology to catch this one that we haven't had for the last, 5,000-7,000 years, whatever you want to call it. So it's not a new phenomenon. We're just now talking about it because it's of the technology. The forgiveness, that's the original point I wanted to touch on with your aunt. I'm glad she's finding peace. A lot of NPEs aren't there yet. And the important thing about forgiveness is that forgiveness isn't about the person that hurt you. Forgiveness is about yourself. When we walk around carrying anger, the interesting thing is when we're angry at someone, we think about that all the time. And that anger is a negative emotion. So it affects everything we do. So if someone's hurt us and we're thinking about them hurting us several times throughout the day, it negatively impacts our day after day after day after day. When in reality, the person that hurt us probably isn't thinking about much at all. So the anger hurts us more than it hurts the person we're angry at. And not that people shouldn't be held accountable, not that you shouldn't create boundaries, not that you shouldn't separate yourself. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that eventually forgiveness is about cleansing the negative emotions from ourselves and letting that go so it's not destroying us internally. And that's a huge, huge, huge piece of this that I really want to get out to NPE people. Unfortunately, there are some people, when you're early in this process, forgiveness isn't even on the radar. And if you bring up forgiveness to some people, they don't hear anything you said after the word forgiveness. It's over. They shut you completely out. Have you had a few of those conversations with some people in the documentary?
Well, I've recognized that it's sort of a touchy subject to bring up, especially early on in the process of discovery. In general, this is how I've been approaching every interview, is I let the other person talk and process. And just sort of how you are, asking me questions, it's sort of more as a guide rather than trying to get anything out of someone. So, the idea of forgiveness has come up naturally for some people I've talked to, and it just hasn't come up for others. And I think as you just said, there are reasons why that isn't something that's coming up at that point. And yeah, I understand that. Yeah, it's complicated. And even as someone who's been outside of that experience, there has been a process of me, thinking about my family, about some of the choices that were made that led to this secret coming out.
I'm glad that you are who you are. And when your aunt had her discovery, that she had you there and that this project was born out of it. I'm sure this has been very cathartic, not only for your aunt, for you, or just for your family, for your father.
My aunt, when she had made this discovery, and I visited her, she had a lot to talk about. And I think it was a really important part of her process for me to listen. And of course I was making a documentary, so that was my job. But I think just as a nephew, it was also really important to just be there and let her talk without judgment, just sort of hear her out. And she's had other people that have been there for her in that way. But until that point, I wouldn't say I was extremely close with her. She lives in the Northeast. I grew up in Texas. And the same goes for my dad and her. We're distant from each other. My immediate family and my aunt and uncle and a lot of my other family. So through the process of her talking with me, I think it was sort of a way of us getting to know each other, which was a really interesting side effect of it all. But it also opened me up to a lot of things that I was learning through her discovery about my family. And I think at a certain point, I did realize that this isn't just about my aunt, that I need to check in on my dad. And at a certain point, someone asked how I was doing, and I was really thrown off because I had never.
What do you mean? I'm fine. What do you mean?
I didn't really think of myself as in a family that had an NPE discovery. I don't know if it was because I was holding a camera through this process, or if it was just a way to not really, to sort of disassociate with some of the really raw emotions that my aunt was dealing with. But yeah, it was interesting to have that realization, and it led me to have a lot of important conversations with my aunt, with my dad, and throughout all this, I want to be respectful to my family, because there are a lot of people in my family, and I don't know how everyone feels about this, but I can speak to my immediate family and saying that it does have a lot of effects, and it has affected me in a few ways. And I think it sort of has just opened me up to an awareness that family is complicated. And I always thought of my family as very straightforward and I think simple in a way. And I think that this whole process has challenged that a little bit, and has also made me a little more understanding of other families and the struggles that, you hear about, but don't always relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Now we're in my territory. We're talking about awareness.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. I think you have a head start on a lot of people in your generation. And I talk about this a lot with NPEs. The one thing about the NPEs is it's so traumatic, but eventually what I try to do is get NPEs to understand that once we get through the trauma, the initial trauma, and we start sorting out, that it's actually a gift. It's an opportunity to really strip down the facade of what we think life is or was, and to rebuild it. And you saw my presentation at the conference about owning your experience, and I talk in that video. I talk a lot about that. That we create who we are as a child by accepting the things that we're told. you know, you're a good athlete, or you're smart, or people love you, or whatever your parents tell us, you know, and um, you're you're a hall, and this is what we do, and we do this and that, and, you know, and we don't do this or whatever. And so we accept those things. So we actually agree. Okay, this is part of my personality. We take this. Okay, oh, this is part of me too. And we actually build our own personality as we're growing. We just don't realize we're doing that. Now we get to this point, we realize, well, half of what I thought I was isn't real. It doesn't exist. So I go to people and say, well, don't just worry about the half that you thought that you think isn't real now, because the other half is what you agreed to too. There's only certain genetic things that you can't control. And I teach people to just rebuild their lives the way they want it to be, who they want to be. And so you're in a very similar situation with this. You've gotten to see this from so many different angles and see the family secrets, and every family's got secrets. And I say all the time, everybody's screwed up. Everybody's screwed up. We're all just trying to hide it from each other. Some people hide it better than others, but we all have our issues. It's growth. It's what life is for. So you have a great insight for your age. You got a big head start on a lot of people in your generation to see that now. The unfortunate part about it is that at times it sucks. It sucks to see, in your case, and I don't mean to speak ill of your family, but this is the reality. It sucks to see that there's a family secret with your grandmother and your grandfather, whatever the case may be, whether it's improprietous or it's not. I don't know what the case is, but that's every case with every NPE. We got to look at, you know, this person made this decision. Why did they do this? And sometimes the truth isn't very pretty, because we begin to see that people really are fallible human beings, that we all make mistakes. But that understanding that you have is monumental. It's invaluable, and will serve you well as you get older, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I think that's sort of what I hope, and what I have witnessed with people also making the discovery themselves is, I mean, it's sort of leading to connections you wouldn't have expected. I've gained a lot of awareness about family, you were just talking about, and it's made me sort of made me look at my own family in a different way. Maybe understanding that, you know, if all parents have had to make tough choices, you know, my parents have probably made hard choices too. And having sort of thought about that, it makes me kind of respect them more. It's kind of just raised my appreciation for my own family, I guess.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's awesome, because that's the second piece I talk about a lot, is awareness and gratitude. And those two things are the foundation for a long and happy life, my friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you stumbled across that early. I'm happy to hear it. I want to tell you that I am grateful to know you. I enjoyed getting to know you on the ship, and you know, shooting some of the scenes that we shot. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm grateful that you're doing this. This is what an amazing opportunity for you as a filmmaker. You know, this is a new phenomenon. It's just exploded. You're standing in the right place at the right time with the right credentials. And but I'm grateful. There are a lot of people that are grateful. There are a lot of more people that are going to be grateful that don't know anything about this yet. So I just wanted you to know that you're appreciated. And yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I'm glad we got to know each other.
Yeah, me too. I'm really, I really appreciate that you connected with me on the cruise, and we spent some time together talking about your story and about the documentary. And yeah, that was really important. And I think, as you've probably heard many times before, it's not every day that you get the male perspective of an NPE discovery. And I think that was, you know, as a male myself, that was an important thing to hear. So I appreciate that.
Good. Yeah. We're lopsided in the group. I think it's like 85% female. And that isn't because 85% of NPEs are female. It's because there are a lot of men that that aren't talking about it, they're not seeking other people out for whatever reason. Hopefully your documentary can change that as well, as this becomes a more, as we spread awareness for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that as well. I mean, my hope for this documentary is to not only share that this is a thing that happens when you take a DNA test sometimes, it's to show people going through this that they're not alone, that there are a lot of people dealing with this. And then also with family members surrounding an NPE discovery, showing what that process looks like for the person making the discovery, and for them to relate to the people that are experiencing the ripple effects. To really just bring everyone together, because it's such a important and challenging topic that it needs community. And I think that's why I've really found how much of a value NPE Friends Fellowship is. It's been amazing witnessing that community. Every conference that I've been to, it really is it's just really touching to see everyone come together around this, and I think there's a lot of strength that comes from that. Yeah,
I agree with you. It's certainly changed my life in a lot of ways. I'm grateful for the group. When I was healing, it was an integral part, and now I'm a healer. Advocacy. I'm reaching back for people behind me that are going through what I've been through and trying to pull them along. I think the group offers that. And the analogy I use is like, climbing up a steep hill. And if everybody's climbing up the hill, reaches back and grabs the person behind them, then we can all pull each other up, So there's somebody in front of me who's helped me, and I'm turning around and I'm helping the person behind me. And that advocacy is extremely important. And the group certainly does that.
Yeah. And also, platforms such as your podcast, I think it's great to have, the more communication, the better, I think.
Yeah.
Basically.
I agree. It's just cathartic. It's cathartic for me. It heals me to talk about it. And my guests get to come on and they all tell me after they're done that it was that a lot of them are nervous. They haven't talked about this in public. They've talked about it with friends, but they haven't talked about it in public. And I know you've heard this a lot doing what you do, that people are extremely nervous when they get on this camera, but there's something about telling your story in front of a camera that is unbelievably healing. So I'm grateful that I enjoy doing it. I'm grateful that I can do it and helping people, which I know what that's like. There's no better feeling, right?
Yeah, and I hope that people's experience in being part of this documentary is like what you said. It's cathartic, and it's been important for them as a way to talk. And in many cases, it is the first time or one of the first times they've shared their story. Yeah. So I'm really honored to have witnessed that, and I appreciate everyone that's been a part of it.
Yeah, good. Well, I again, I appreciate you coming to do this. I'm really looking forward to the documentary. We should talk about doing like a naming contest, and
yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be cool. So,
and I think it is important to include the NPE community on something like that. So that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that would be really cool. So I'll send you a message. We maybe work out the details of that.
Okay, cool.
Well, I appreciate you joining me, Owen. It's I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I have too. Thanks so much for including me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'll be in touch soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay.